Hello, everyone. So for those of you that I'm yet to meet, I am Lizzie. I'm co-founder of Kindaba, and we're building the private communication tool for your family. But I'm also the host tonight of the FamTech Summit, and I'm here to introduce our next speaker. But before I get to that, I just want to say that we have an amazing community, and we are made up of parents, siblings, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and we're all interested in learning about family and technology. So I'm really glad that you've dialed in to join us today. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Nicole. Give us a wave.
Hi, everyone.
So Nicole is great. She is founder of Relocate Guru, and Relocate Guru is really all about being the place to make moving to a new place easier. It helps you be a part of that community before you've even moved there. So I'm going to hand over and just let Nicole tell me a little bit about what does family mean to you, Nicole?
So family to me is sort of like this big, crazy community, I suppose, of people that are all different, and like you probably would never be friends, but you're closer than anything. They know your whole history, like they know everything about you, and they love you anyway. And like for all the flaws and like all the dramas and all the chaos that ensues, it's like when the bleep sort of like hits the fan, they're there for you no matter what. It's like even if you have like really bad sort of like times, it's like it doesn't matter, because when you need them, they're there, because that's what family is.
Yeah, that's incredible. So who makes up that kind of community for you that you speak about?
So there's my brother and sort of like so many cousins, it's crazy. It's like how many generations you want to go back. Where do you want to start? So I think it's like, for me, it sort of like goes back to like grandparents, like a little bit great grandparents, but definitely grandparents were a really big influence to me, especially my grandfather. He was born in Grenada in the Caribbean. He was one of 8 or 9 siblings. So, and in the Second World War, they had to move to London, which is like really bad place to be moving to, obviously at that time. But they had, so all his siblings and everything, apart from his elder sisters who were maybe married, moved to the UK, and they to a tiny little house in London, and it was just mental. And so his siblings and then their families, so it's like a really big family. And then my dad, he was one of 4, so again sort of like large family. They're Catholic, that probably explains a lot. And my grandparents were actually in the same church youth group, so they actually grew up together, like a few streets apart, like my nan and granddad. And actually so that's my mum's mum and dad, but also my dad's parents also went to the same church. So they were like friends from like kids. So my dad's parents and my mum's parents grew up together. And it was just serendipity of like my mum going to the Olympic Games to her auntie who lived in Canada at the time for the Montreal Olympic Games. My dad had got a grant from university and was out at the Olympic Games, and they met up in Montreal for the Olympics. And because it's like, oh, it's Auntie Grace, you know?
All right, this is a global story. This is phenomenal.
Yeah, so I grew up with like family just around the world from day zero. There was never any like, that was just normal. Like there was no mention of expats or anything. It was like you were just British. Like my nan's Irish, my granddad's Grenadian, my uncle's Indian, but you're all still just British. That was so I didn't really realize this was a big thing until like later on in my life. And we just all get together whenever we can, and sort of like weddings are just bonkers. Like the invite list gets a bit crazy because all the cousins and like the different generations, and we all communicate in different ways, so it's like juggling all that. and the different expectations. So it's a big, messy, crazy family.
That sounds relatable though, that does. So tell me a little bit about, you had this global family, it was normal to you. You talk about the excitement of family. So when new things happen or something that you take completely for granted, but you maybe find it hard to communicate and keep in touch. What really sparked your inspiration for Relocate Guru? Where did that become a kind of personal?
It became from a personal pain point from, we moved around because of my dad worked in oil and gas. So we moved for his job, and we moved, the biggest culture shock was actually moving to Scotland, because you're like, oh, it's still in the UK, it's fine, it's just a bit more further north, that's all that's different, but it's further from the truth, going from effectively the southeast, like near London, to Ballater, like in the tiniest little place in Scotland, where the people in the shops don't speak English, they speak Doric, and that's quite a big leap. So that was a big culture shock. And also then moving with my husband's job, because he works in oil and gas. So moving with a toddler was where I got the big, like, oh my goodness, this is really tough, because I was then personally responsible for everybody else's happiness when moving. Like my needs were like just not important. Like it was more important to make sure my son was in the right school catchment area, that we had the house in the right location, so my husband wasn't having too big of a commute. And I had to give up my job to do this move, and I had to organize everything because he was sent away to Madrid for training. So I had to have all that on my shoulders. And then when we did move, it was until like 6 months later that neighbors who are also expats go, oh, didn't you know that that thing is just around the corner? I was like, well, that would have been useful 6 months ago. And it's like all this collective knowledge that we have about a location becomes completely obsolete like 6 months later when we're sent away to move again. And it's like, well, why can't there be just one spot where we can hold all this information, this valuable knowledge that we've built up about our community, to pass on to the next poor person who's trying to figure it out, and help them feel more at home and more settled, and find that community of friends and neighbors to just make it home. Like a good example was like just this morning, I was coming down with a cold and sort of like text my neighbor that we used to live together, lived next door to each other 10 years ago, and just as fate's allowed, we've moved like 3 or 4 times each since, and we're living in the same street again. It's crazy. And she like came over, popped around after the school run this morning with Lemsip capsules and chocolate, and I was like, you're the best. You're the best neighbor ever. And it's like finding those connections. If you can find those connections before you've even moved to a place, that sense of belonging and sense of like, oh, I'm not alone and I've got someone to help, it makes life so much better.
Incredibly powerful. And this experience can't just be yours, right? So talk me through what other kind of walks of life, careers lead people to this kind of big change where they might feel solely responsible for, you put it there, like everybody's happiness. That's not just moving, that's you being responsible for making this work.
Yeah. So a lot of my friends and sort of like people that I've spoken to are generally expat spouses. They've generally had like very powerful, like very important careers and a very international life, and they meet their partner and or they've had to move for their own jobs. And now that I'm up here in Aberdeen, it's sort of like it's a very much oil and gas city. There's a lot of expats, so you tend to sort of like hop around all the hubs from Houston to Singapore to Kuala Lumpur to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. It just becomes like, oh, you're on the trail. But it doesn't make it, everyone was complaining about exactly the same things. So even a friend of mine who was like a VP for Baker Hughes. Like she was sent to Dubai, but it was still kind of on her mind about schools and housing and things like that. Even though her husband was very helpful, it was like the responsibility still kind of weighed on her. Like the company helped a little bit, but it's all those more softer touches that take a long time. It's like, well, where is the best supermarket?
Yeah. And in your experience, what kind of difficulties come into play for people when, your example there, if you move to Abu Dhabi and you're far away from family, when do people feel that most?
Definitely when stuff happens with family back home. If a family member gets sick, if someone dies unexpectedly, or even just little things, it's sort of like that you're just used to, like if you're just feeling unwell and like you would normally have just your mum around the corner who could help pick up the kids from school, or pop round with a cup of, like for a cup of tea, or it can be just like the smallest triggers. And there's loads of information out there. It's sort of like you go through sort of like a wave of like, yay, it's exciting moving, and then a real like low of going, oh crap, what have I done? And feeling really homesick, and you can't do anything about it. And it's like sometimes the FaceTime calls and things can almost make it worse, because it's like that reminder that you aren't there, you're missing out. And seeing those pictures of your family, you kind of miss that. And then the people that you've left behind at home are sort of like jealous of your glamorous life that you're putting over on Instagram. It's like, oh, isn't this wonderful? And like actually at home, you're in floods of tears, and because your shipping container hasn't arrived, and everything's going wrong. So it's always a hard one to juggle, because you want to put on like a brave face, and that, oh yeah, for your own self, that it's a survival mechanism. But and whereas everyone at home is getting, but you're just like watching through social media and things, that everyone else is just getting on with their lives and kind of leaving you out of it, like you feel disconnected.
We hear that from families all the time that we speak to who are separated by a large distance, and that point about, oh well, your life looks great is often felt like, and that's really difficult. That could be what you're able to speak about. If you work in the military, you're probably not going to be able to share the details about what's not great about your life, right? Mm-hmm. And there's definitely something in that, what you said about us putting our best foot forward, that we all do on different forms of social media. So yeah, how do we get that intimate connection, that ability to have a space where we can be truly, this is awful. Like you and I were speaking earlier, I'm totally going to own up. So I look beautiful at the moment. Look at this amazing backdrop. And we were both sharing the messes of our rooms earlier, right? We were
like, yeah, my laundry is just like down there.
Right. And we were speaking about that. We were like, we're looking very professional, but we also have lives, and it is 10 to 10 at night, and we have fitted this in because we're pros, right? Which I really appreciate, Nicole.
Just make stuff happen.
We just make it happen. But I think that's such an interesting point. What kind of stories do you have about when people have kind of worked through those pain points with family members and have kind of found a place where they are able to talk about it's not that easy and it is difficult, and how do they kind of find that again, that place?
I think it really depends on your personal relationships and who you're really close to. Like, who can you be actually your truest, honest self with? And sometimes that isn't necessarily like your immediate like circle of family. It's maybe a second cousin or an uncle or an auntie that you can actually be more honest and open with for different situations. And it's not for all situations. Right. Like it could be like, oh, I can talk to this cousin really openly about this little bit, but I can't speak to them about this thing because they just can't relate. And because we're all human beings, we've all got different experiences that we can bring empathy with.
We're complex.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, go and speak to so and so. It's like you want to sort of like show different, that there's a phrase, somebody that says, it's like, oh, we're like diamonds. It's like we've got different facets. It doesn't mean, like, we're still our authentic self just because we want to show one facet to a person or a group of people. It's like, it doesn't mean that the rest of it doesn't exist or isn't authentic. You know, it's like, well, we show different facets in different occasions to different people at different times.
Yeah, that's really powerful, having that choice and having that, I guess, self-awareness to know who is it that I'm going to go and speak to, that I have a trusting relationship about this aspect. And
yeah,
that the notion of empathy there is so important. So how do people go about, in your experience, making a place feel like home? And obviously part of it is knowing the community, like that community feel, whether it's being part of your family, still being in touch with your friends, or making a new community away from home. How do people start that?
it's putting yourself out there. The number one thing that everybody says, it's like, it's making the effort. It's like, even when you really don't feel like it, it's making the effort to go up to someone and say hi. Like, it's knocking on the neighbor's door going, hi, I'm new here. And it's like being the first kid at school again. And it is tough. And when you don't feel like it and you're jet lagged or whatever, and you're sort of like, kids are sort of like not settling in at school, and it's like, oh, and the worst is like the school playground for the mums. But it's also the best, because if you can find that other mum who matches you, it's yeah, just like finding another sister who will have your back, like when you're running late and you're for the school pickup, and they've got your back to like pick up the slack, or yeah, like you're sick and sort of like they're bringing you sort of chocolate there. It's like you need to find these people who can support you, and it's being brave enough in the vulnerability of that, because it's like, and asking for help. As a friend of mine has just moved to Ghana, and she slipped and twisted her ankle, so couldn't do like the school runs. And her husband was sent away on a business trip like the next day. So she's like, I can't stand, I can't do the cooking, I can't do anything. And I was just like telling you this was the same time as I broke my arm. And it's just like, we would make a right pair.
Together you're whole.
Exactly. And it's like, no, if you just ask for help, sort of like people want to help. It's like just getting over your own ego sometimes, that you think, oh, I can manage everything. It's like, no, just ask the person across the street and go like, yeah, I'm more than happy to pick up your son from the bus. It's no big deal. Like, I'm doing it anyway. And it makes them feel good that they've actually helped. Whereas if they find out like 2 weeks later when you're better, going, and they will feel guilty that they didn't help because they didn't know. Yeah. So you're like giving them the opportunity to feel good by asking for help.
Yeah, that is refreshing, isn't it? It's something that we should do more often. And let's explore that a bit more. You've spoken there about the vulnerability and kind of getting over your ego, moving into kind of your experience in parenting, especially when it comes to technology. So how old is your wee one now, and what kind of interaction does he have with technology?
So yeah, my son's now 9, so he's only ever known a world with technology at your fingertips. Like, we held off as long as humanly possible before giving him his own device. But it just kind of felt inevitable. And especially like working on my own startup, sort of like having to take him along to business meetings and things. It's like, I have to give you this iPad so that you are entertained, so I can focus on my business meeting for an hour. And it's like, the mum guilt is huge.
Yeah, how do you...
It's so big.
Yeah, is that something, is it partially external, partially internal? Is it more one than the other? Like, where do you feel that?
Oh, everywhere. It's definitely external. There's a lot of pressure, but there's also like a realism inside going like, this is a phase, this is what I've got to do right now. And it's like, okay, I balance that out with like, okay, he's going to every extracurricular activity I can get him to. So he's like football on Saturdays, karate's on Wednesdays, ski club on Monday. Like, so it's like, I'm to make sure he gets outside and he isn't on the screen 24/7. So I kind of try and counterbalance it for my own, as much as he loves doing all those things, it's also for my own self, like, preservation.
Yeah, and can you see when you're talking about his interaction with devices, do you, as a family, have discussions about whether it's screen time or if it's the kind of stuff that he's allowed to interact with and engage with? How do you guys handle that?
Yeah, so my husband's like really strict on this, which I'm grateful for because then I don't need to think so much. And so the latest iOS update has allowed you to sort of select to constrict the time, which my son does not enjoy. Because he would usually sneak out of bed early in the morning, downstairs, sort of like, we even sort of like put the iPad sort of like under our pillows to try and stop him from doing this. And he managed. Like, he's sneaky. He's clever. And he would like creep in, get the iPad and creep downstairs and put his earphones in so that we wouldn't know that he's on the iPad. And we knew, but it's like, we're too damn tired.
Absolutely, absolutely. So those kind of controls, what kind of freedom have they given you then in kind of that relationship?
Yeah, they've kind of given the freedom. It's like, okay, you've got your allotted time that we've kind of negotiated, but kind of said like, and that's enough, that's reasonable. And if you want extra, then it's at our discretion if it's an emergency situation. But generally it's like not, but he can sometimes, he's too clever and can work out how to get round of it. So we need to constantly try and keep up with him on that. And things that are inappropriate, we set our security settings pretty high and make sure the privacy settings are very high, and like parental controls are at their highest level, which can the biggest issue with that seems to be YouTube, which he just loves YouTube, and we've tried deleting that app several times, but it still keeps coming. So that one is, YouTube is our bugbear at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's something really interesting that I spoke to someone about earlier, was he always felt that he was 10, if not 50 steps ahead of his parents with his interaction with technology. He always felt like, my parents can set whatever boundaries, but I'm going to know more about technology. Is that something that, obviously times are a little bit different now, and we are working with technology and your startup all day, every day. But is that a fear that you have as your son gets older? How do you kind of warn against that is it through conversation? Is it through rules? How does that work?
It's definitely through conversation rather than rules. It's definitely of like being aware. It's like, okay, if you're hiding stuff from us, then you obviously know that it's not okay. So if you're keeping open with like what you're engaging with online, and sort of like, and we've had very deep discussions of what's okay and not okay, and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. So it's like, okay, if these things happen, you have to block, delete, tell us. Yeah. And so and it's more about the social aspects of being online. Right. But because he's got really strong relationships with friends at school, it kind of minimizes that impact so much, because he's kind of navigating that quite well at school, and is a very sociable kid. But I can imagine, I do have a fear about when it gets to kind of teenage years a lot more, but also slightly relieved he's not, I don't have a girl to worry about, because that is just a whole nother level of what I see my friends going through. And yeah, that's a whole different
Yeah, I mean, is
Well,
that, I know this is something that we've kind of touched on before, is do you think there is an opportunity there with having a son to talk about a male's role in those interactions, and talk about, like you say, the continuation of the conversation of what's appropriate and not, because it's not a one-sided issue, right, in the teenage years.
no, and I suppose he is. It's difficult because his class is sort of like predominantly boys. Like his school used to be an all-girls school, but there's only 5 girls in his class. So, but as a result, the girls have had to just muck in with the boys, and there isn't really the whole girl-boy thing isn't an issue yet. Um, but I can see that going to be an issue in like the next 3 or 4 years, or earlier if it's because it gets weird all the time. So yeah, it's like as a parent, you're constantly having to adapt, and just keeping good communication with like parents who, like friends who are parents with, who are in the next stage, and go like, how do you do this? And it's like the same with any parent. It's like you ask, or even starting a business, it's like you ask the person who's like the next step ahead of you, going like, how do I survive this step? Because and it's like everyone, we wing it. We're just winging it as parents, as startup founders, business owners, whatever. You're just winging it.
Incredibly refreshing to hear. And how much do we need to tell each other that, as parents, as business owners, as like, nobody has arrived, nobody has made it, we're all still on the journey, and sometimes it sucks and sometimes we're rubbish at it, but
and it's also being compassionate with yourself. It's like, tell yourself the things that you would tell your best friend when everything goes, like if your friend comes to you in tears when everything's going wrong, you don't sort of like berate them and sort of like criticize them like we criticize ourselves. Like you say like, that really sucks, and sort of like you help to build them back up again, and give them a hug, give them chocolate, a cup of tea, and tell them everything's going to be okay. So why can't we do that for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely hear you. So self-care, asking for help, and I guess just surrounding yourself by those people who are going to look out for you, right?
And that's the same in parenthood, family life, and startup life, is surround yourself with people who lift you up and can support you.
Spot on. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I know you've had quite the day. Put parenting on as well as your business hat, so I super appreciate that. But just to round up our conversation, I'd love the chance for anyone tonight who wanted to learn more about either you and your experiences, or about Relocate Guru, how could they find out more, and where could they get in touch?
Yes, I would love to connect with any of you who are watching. So you can find me on Facebook at Relocate Guru, or on Instagram and same Relocate Guru, or you can read my blog at www.relocateguru.io and find more about the app.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I hope you guys all enjoyed that. And Nicole, you're a superstar. Chat to you later.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.